Jacksonville, a child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. The poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. With Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talked for hours. It was a barefoot history in this land of flowers.
The Weekman was on the 20th of October 2018, beaming from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. In the world of sports, on Tuesday night, the World Series will start in Fenway Park in Boston. The National League Series will end tonight in Milwaukee, with either the Brewers winning the title or the LA Dodgers. Last night, in a game that really was not that excited after the early endings, we'll do the line score in a few minutes here. We basically ended up with a situation where Mr. Ryu gave up 3 runs, 4 runs, and I believe the final score was 6-2 Milwaukee. So the Brewers were brewing on. I guess they didn't drink too much beer in the clubhouse, and tonight they will do a Game 7. To baseball purists, a Game 7 is akin, I suppose, to the Hanging Chads, for those that recall that episode, down in the state of Florida, where the presidential election, this was the run between G.W. Bush and Albert Gore of Tennessee. Albert Gore of Tennessee won the election, the popular vote, and with 500 plus votes, G.W. Bush was declared the winner in Florida. And at the time, his brother, Baby Bush, known as Jeb Bush, who later ran for president and was destroyed by D.J. Trump. D.J. Trump called him Low Energy Bush. And he started actually running and that sort of thing, but it didn't help him out any. He was the man that was ahead in all the polls, had all the money. This was the 2016 presidential race, but he faded fast. The last one standing, I believe, was Lying Ted Cruz. This was the same field that Karl Rove, who we'll take up here in just a minute, said it was one of the best fields that the Republicans had ever, or best crop of candidates that the Republicans had fielded. And it turned out to be one of the sorriest collection of characters out there. They had a number of people there. It was sort of like they would crest for a week or so, and down they would go. That was the same one where you had Herman. Let me see, was Herman Cain in that one? Or was he? No, different race. Sorry about that. Anyway, nonetheless, they had a bunch of characters in the race, and after each person having basically their week and a half in the of fame, they disappeared. And the last standing, I think, out of Philadelphia, what was his name? The Republican there, Zirconium? No. Anyway, very close, but no cigar there. He was one of these pro-family type characters, but he was not able to maintain it. Adelson, the billionaire out of Vegas, threw a lot of money into that particular race, and a lot of people thought about it, including even Willard Romney. Willard Romney, if you recall, was the candidate in 2012. 2008 was the late John McCain. Anyway, nonetheless, DJ Trump came out on top of the heap, so to speak, running what was thought as an unconventional campaign, yet it was very well planned. A stream of consciousness type campaign it was called. We've seen those run before. They're very difficult to defend against. And the Republicans had figured through their masterminds that would be one very effective campaign to run. If you recall, back in for those back in 2004, the Swift Boat campaign. That was the campaign against Brother John Kerry. It was a different type of campaign, more or less a Republican campaign where you just use these outrageous ads, sort of like the Willie Horton campaign ran against our own Professor Dukakis of Boston. Anyway, so that was kind of what they did, but the Stream of Consciousness campaign brought forth by an analytics house that was second to none. I'm not talking about Cambridge Analytics. The Trump people had their analytics shop in San Antonio, Texas. It was ran by this ex-basketball player, was 6'7", 6'8", whatever he was. I can't think of his name right now. But he started out basically doing websites. And he was the front for the analytics. The analytics were very good. And they used something very similar to the Tea Parties. You don't hear that term anymore because the Tea Parties that were born of Republican consultants basically have bit the dust. Now they are known as the Trumpeteers, and the Trump people out in Trump country is basically what you hear these days. So let's go to Uncle Carl and the so-called Brett Kavanaugh bump. Uncle Carl is writing on the 18th of October in the Wall Street Journal. Title of his article is GOP October Comeback. Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing jolted Republican enthusiasm. The 22nd of July's NPR PBS poll, and Marxist University College had the poll, for example, found that 78% of Democrats and only 68% of Republicans considered the midterm very important. By October, the same poll showed Democrats had edge had almost evaporated, 82 to 80%, a 2 percentage point there, from a 10% point. Now, the problem is that with these polls, Uncle Carl is not telling you. We don't have the margin of error on that, but usually it's at least 2.5 or 3.5. So you basically could be talking about 7%. So you had a 5% drop. There was a similar change in the generic ballot on the 12th of September. Quinnipiac poll preferred Democrats to Republicans by for the House by 52 to 38. It jumped in October. The same survey found 49 support for the Democrats, 42 support for the Republicans. But it isn't just about Kavanaugh. The Republicans' position improved as Republican voters are naturally rallying around their party. Democratic voters committed to their candidates earlier than Republicans did, but starting in September, even before the Democrats had the Kavanaugh circus, he calls it, which the Republicans orchestrated. They were the ringmasters. Enthusiasm was growing. The confirmation battle was an accelerant. for the trend already underway. Well, I guess one way you could describe it. In a Tennessee contest, Phil Brazen led in 5 of 6 public polls between March and August, but since Labor Day, Marsha Blackburn has led in 4 of 5 surveys and is ahead by 5.5 in the real clear channel. That's the average. The average can be a distortion because you have people in there like Rasmussen, and if you're a poll in there, you can affect the outcome substantially in many cases. That makes sense. Tennessee has many more Republicans than Democrats, no doubt about that. At one time, Albert Gore was a senator from Tennessee, and his father was also. In 2016, G.J. Trump won the state by 26 points, and the last time a Democrat won statewide was in 2006. Of course, it was Governor Brazen himself. Anyway, Republicans in Missouri got engaged in September after leading in one of only 8 polls between March and August. The Attorney General there, Josh Hockley, has been tied nearly ahead of Claire McCaskill in 5 or 6 polls since September, but now leads by just a half point in the real clear average. Well, Carl likes to use the averages. We at the Ouija board don't use the averages because that in itself can many times get you in trouble. Anyway, Hartley seems to be hitting his stride after the confirmation he owned the issue of judges, using it to cement his support and swing more Republicans, conservatives into his column. In North Dakota, in Indiana, similarly, well, not exactly. Democrats rallied behind the incumbent senators this spring and this summer, while Republicans took until September. But usually after Labor Day, traditionally in campaigns, that is when it becomes important. Now, of course, in October, we start looking very closely. Something similar is happening in purple states like Arizona. Martha McSally began closing the gap there, and buoyed by ads showing her opponent, Christian Sinema, speaking against a bill raising penalties on men who hired child. Again, that was a totally different situation, bogus. This is an example of the kind of swift boat ads Republicans historically have used. Is that Uncle Carl's toolkit? Will it work this time? Well, those kinds of ads work if the circumference, in other words, if the number of eligible voters is not increased. And Arizona is changing, there's no doubt about that. Senator has found difficult calling Arizonans crazy in 2011, and the state MEP Lab of Democracy in 2010, when conspiracy talk show host asked in 2003 if she had a problem with America's joining the Taliban. She replied, "Fine, I don't care if you want to do that, go ahead." Now, that was a hypothetical, and this is what happens when you stretch the facts into something else. And this is a stock and trade of the Republicans, and you have to be aware of this. And the Democratic Party and somewhat progressives in general have not figured out how to master the masters of deceit, period. And so that is a situation here. We had real clear channels here. 2 candidates that young people love, show the future of both parties. This is in Lake Michigan. John James, an African-American West Point grad and Iraqi veteran who command Apache helicopters. I'm not sure what all this is about. On the same day, 2,000 miles away, in McAllen, Texas. They're talking here about Beto O'Rourke, who was doing his own form of politicking by live streaming. His wife and 2 staffers in the car. Anyway, at a laundromat. Beto O'Rourke is coming in early James is earnest in his conservatism. I'm not sure about James, but Beto O'Rourke raised $38 million. Michigan voters, on the other hand, have a swinging backs and forth. Jones has the youth and conviction to persuade enough Democrats and independents to pull out a surprise in 3 weeks over Debbie Stabenow. That will not happen in Michigan, period. You can take that to the bank unless something really, really big happens. And that kind of situation is not there. So we'll have to see on that. And I had not. This is in the New York Post, which is owned by Murdoch. Well, we just throw that in. Let's look at the polling here. I'm not certain at all if there is any Saturday polling. I looked at this a few hours ago. There is some out here. Again, this is the Seneca poll from the New York Times in Arizona. McSally's up by 2, according to them. Ms. Sinema is at 46. She's at 48. This has been back and forth in the state, in Florida. This is District 15. Spano and Carlson, they are tied up in the state of Florida. In Pennsylvania, Cartwright is ahead by 12 points. That is District 8. It was polling today. Look at some of the Friday polling. We have Maine, the Pan-Atlantic poll. King is up by 27 there. And the governor's race in Maine, Mills, I'm not sure, Mills is up by 8. In New Hampshire, Sununu is up by 11. That is the governor's race over Kelly. Michigan 11, it is tied up between Epstein and Stevens at 48-48. That is a Target Insight poll. And then we have out of House District 8 in Michigan, we have Bishop is ahead by 3 there. And another Pan-Atlantic poll, I assume that's coming out of Maine, has Pelquist and Golden tied up at 37-37. That's in the 2nd District of Maine. In West Virginia, Miller is ahead by 5. Another Maine, this is the 2nd District, has Panquist and Golden tied up at 41. And where was the other Maine we had here? Anyway, we had the ties. Anyway, I thought we had another Maine. The Pan-Atlantic poll. This is governor. Oh, Senate. No, sorry about that. That is the independent King there. Maine's 2nd District. We gave that one. That was the New York Times. We'll just call it New York Times. In the 23rd, that is in Texas. Hurd is ahead by 15. We've noticed Hurd being ahead by double digits recently there, so that seat doesn't seem to be going anywhere. In Jersey 11, Sherrill is up by 11 there in the double digits over Weber. That's been pretty much a pattern. The morning call out of Pennsylvania. District 7, Wild is ahead. And this is where we get these averages on the approval rating. They have DJ Trump everywhere from 47 at the outliner poll, Rasmussen, to 42 at CBS. And right direction, wrong track's up by 21. Can't pay very much attention to that. We'll go to Thursday. Vanderbilt University brazen up by 1 over Blackburn. That is Vanderbilt. We looked at that poll. Something there. In Jersey, who is it? Menendez. Senator, long-serving senator, is up by 8 points. And in California, Feinstein's up by 13. She's been in double digits for a very long time. In New York, Gillibrand is up by 25. That's really not a race there. And another one out of Vanderbilt, Lee, I suppose the Republican, up by 11. Lee has been in the double digits. Como is up by 23, another double-digit race. And in Kansas, Free, Yoder, and Davis. Davis is up by 9. Not familiar with that race. And in Colorado, Ave, Crow is up by 9. And finally, in the Florida 1, this is Spano and Carlson. They are tied up. We've seen that before. And the St. Pete poll has Scott ahead. This was on Wednesday by 2. A Grabbers poll in Indiana. We've seen Donnelly up. He's up by 4. Grabbers is a Republican house, incidentally. Senator Menendez up by 7. The Quinnipiac poll. Another St. Pete poll, Gillum up by 1 over DeSantos. Gillum has been up more than that. And Newsom up by 8. That's a KFI poll. We did a debate there. Incidentally, we also have a debate, the final debate, between Beto O'Rourke and lying Ted Cruz. So for those that want to stay tuned to that one. So another California Senate poll was on Tuesday. Feinstein ahead by 14. She's been in double digits. A Texas Senate race, that race has tightened up some. They have Cruz up by 7 over O'Rourke. That was on Tuesday. And Cantwell up by 14. That's out of Washington State. Wheelchair Abbott's up by 18 over Valdez. That's a Texas poll. Newsom up by 17. That's a Survey USA poll, KABC. And we have an LA Times poll. Newsom's up by 23. It stays in double digit. And out of Oregon, Kate Brown up by 5. She's been slightly ahead for a while here. And Cabrino up by 2. That is Florida 26. So we go way back to Monday. It's a long ways back there. This is Heller up by 7 over Rosen. That is in Arizona. The Gomez Research out of Maryland. That is Cardin up by 27. Well, that's not even a race there. That's a Senate race in there. And out of Salt Lake City Tribune, Romney up by 36 over Willard Romney. Nevada Governor, let's see, we got Laxalt up by 5. Emerson poll, that is out of New Hampshire. Sununu again in double digits with Emerson, also Republican House. Virginia Newport News poll there. What was that? Virginia's 2nd. Taylor is up there. Wallace is up in Pennsylvania 1. In Minnesota, wait a minute here. Minnesota 8th. We got Stuber up by 15. That is 1, but we see as flipping in the state of Minnesota. That's in northern Minnesota. And there's some more New Hampshire stuff here. And way back to Sunday, well, the approval rating, and we continue back here. Now, this is a New York Times Senator poll, had Blackburn up by 14. That was last Friday, so we can see that, according to that poll, she's losing some steam, period there. So let me, odd time to get the score from last night. Well, we will get the score from last night. Here is the NBA scores. I believe we gave that. We just want to give the line score out here. Dodgers 2 and Brewers ended up with 7. The line score was the Brewers had 7 runs, 11 hits, and the Dodgers 2 runs and 5 hits, no errors on the part of both teams. Kimbrough was the winner this time around, and Ryu actually ended up on the short end of the stick, so to speak. And of course, we'll have that rematch tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Dodgers and Brewers. live from Milwaukee. Walker Buehler, a rookie, will actually be starting there, and we'll see where that goes. And I don't want to try to pronounce his name, so we'll just skate away. We'll go to the Washington Post here. Now, the latest scheme the Saudis have come up with on Khashoggi, that he died in the consulate. They finally admitted that. It was a fight. They had came up with one lie after the other one here, that the journalist, he worked for the Washington Post, left the Istanbul mission alive. Well, that was obviously a lie. Now he's dead. They haven't found the bodies of yet. A number of people here. The Saudis claim that Khashoggi died in a brawl. Immediately drew skepticism. There's no doubt about that. This is just not going to work. Period here. Jamal Khashoggi died in a physical altercation. Yeah, that would happen. They had 15 people there. Period. The Saudis claim that some number of unnamed suspects had traveled to the consulate to meet with Khashoggi. We've not found out exactly what touched all this off. We know he went in to get some papers, and I was always kind of amazed, why in the hell would he go into their mission to get any papers? Why didn't he have them bring the papers out? But nonetheless, he went in, and whatever was going on there, they had 15 people that had flown into Turkey, Istanbul, and this is where it doesn't wash out very well at all. Lindsey Graham is in this. Had warned DJ Trump and his advisors, if they didn't react, the Saudis will see it as a weakness, no doubt about that. So it's been a big problem over this. This case has the potential to cause more problems for DJ Trump's administration than Kavanaugh and some of the other machinations there. Now, pictures of passports, we've seen 7 of 15 Saudis on Tuesday, that the information is verified that one arrived in Washington in March, 3 days before the Crown Prince. Now, these were all associates and cronies of the Crown Prince, so to speak, and they were members of the intelligence service, whom they said have been fired. So this story continues on. Now, will this story affect the election in October? Probably not, because again, Americans don't tend to respond to foreign type of situations, period. So that's, and incidentally, in Spain, they are finally getting rid of the fascist Franco. They are removing his remains from the Valley of the Fallen. That is a memorial there in Spain. Now, this is another interesting note here. We'll have the late great Jerry Pippin in talking about the Affordable Care Act. His thesis was, once people get used to it, they will like it. And now the Republicans are racing to back protection for the health care law that they had fought against, called pre-existing conditions. But unfortunately for them, with the skinny plans and those kinds of things, this cannot happen. Period. So this in itself is a big situation, and Hartley in Iowa pointed out, he's the Attorney General, pointed out his one of his children that has a pre-existing condition. But people should not be fooled by that. In Missouri, we're getting to that, Josh Hartley has been hammered by the woman he hoped to unseat, Clara Castle, for being among the attorney generals who've asked the federal court to render unconstitutional the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. You don't go to court and get rid of important protection when there is no backup, when people would be in free fall. That's what McCaskill said. We'll cover that debate, incidentally. That was Thursday night. There's a number of debates, and this is a special project of WBRN and BostonRed.org. We're covering as many debates as we can, period. In Wisconsin, Boss Walker is seeking a third term there. He said he supports maintaining Obamacare, and it's in a race out in California. So Dana Rockenbacher is like Hockley using his child's illness to provide sympathy when in fact he voted against it. You can't provide sympathy because you have a child and you literally actively try to destroy the Affordable Care Act. How stupid do they think people are? For more than 8 years, their greatest and most unifying party rally cry had been repealing Obamacare. And why did this happen? This happened because of the racist reaction to President Obama, and this reason to try to destroy a legacy that is not destroyable. Affordable Care Act, they used to say that the Affordable Care Act itself would destroy the healthcare industry, and that was an outright lie. The healthcare industry has grown under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, not been destroyed. And part of the reason for this is the focus on pre-existing conditions. Very, very important. Preventive medicine is more important than when you go in and you're dealing with diseases that have been lurking in the body for a number of years, such as diabetes, hypertension. I can say because we have hypertension, I have diabetes. And those situations there, the treatment of them, yes, but the situation is prevention. Exercise is key to both of those, and also a diet, period. And for many of us, my physician never talked to me about diet, talked about medication, but not diet. Exercise, yes. So we'll give a little bit of credit here. Nonetheless, Senator McCain, the late great Senator McCain, when he voted no, that killed their drive, because if he had not voted no, the Republicans would have gotten rid of pre-existing conditions because they would have left it up to the states, and many of those states would have done that. I think the big issue is the brazenness with which the mantle is being put on to say that this is something they've already supported. This is Sabrina Corletti. She's a professor of health policy at George Washington University, GW. Most healthcare experts say the Republicans' position is contradictory. No doubt about that. It's opportunistic, we'd call it, because without a replacement plan in place, people with past or existing illnesses would lose their protection they have now. How to handle pre-existing conditions, a major flashpoint in the debate last year. The bill voted on did not eliminate protection from pre-existing conditions, but it weakened those considerably by giving power, and this is to the states, and to waive certain requirements for insurers' demands from the conservative base. The irony is what you allow the House to pass. The repeal bill was a proposal to weaken protection for pre-existing conditions. This was not an obscure part of the debate. As said Larry Levitt, he's a senior vice president of health reform at the Kaiser Family Foundation. Their tracking poll found that 70% of voters say healthcare is very important to them and the factor in whom they vote, and 30% said it's the most important issue. And this is something that the Democratic Party has to frame correctly. And this goes back to your whole framing and the center of where you are philosophically. Fortunately for Bernie Sanders and his candidates, they've had the correct framing. Now, what the reactionaries try to do is say, well, okay, we have Medicare for all, that would be single payer, you would lose your insurance coverage. That's absolutely not true. You would have a government-sponsored insurance regime over time. It wouldn't be set up the next day. but you could still have the opportunity to buy private insurance as you can in Canada. Canada has a national health care plan. But as in also here, people 65 over, incidentally reminding people that this is the time to re-enroll in the various supplemental plans for Medicare. That started this week. So it's a very short time period. This is for people on Medicare that are 65 or older, or people that are disabled, that are on Social Security disability. So this is one of the things, and all those plans have changed this year. So all of us that have to choose new plans are choosing new plans, if not chosen them already. Anyway, in August, 10 Republican senators, including Dean Heller of Nevada, one of the more vulnerable ones, facing re-election challenges next month, sponsors such a bill, but to help policy experts point to loopholes in the measure. Most of these have been scams, no doubt about it. On the House side, this is Stephen Knight. He's a Republican from California, trying to fend off a difficult challenge. That's in 25 in California, introducing a bill with tighter protections. Two of Republican Congress types, Young of Iowa and Sessions of Texas, each introduced non-binding. I've seen these non-binding resolutions are nothing more than tricks out there. Levitt, again, of the Kaiser Foundation, sees a silver lining to Democrats, forcing Republicans to take public and pronounced stands on pre-existing conditions. It's quite dynamic to see this bipartisan consensus on pre-existing conditions. Levitt said it might be that the most enduring legacy of the Affordable Care Act is a dynamic shift in the belief that pre-existing conditions should be a guarantee of coverage. The Republicans would like to get this out if they could possibly do it. They've been working on it for quite some time, and they've not been able to achieve it. Now, a lot of private polling, and this hasn't been talked about, statements of DJ Trump and company, the Republicans' private polling shows that they are losing the House and will lose the House. Now, it's not 100%, but this is from their private polling. A little bird flew in and told us about that. So these are some of the things that are coming up here that you've not heard. If you look at various polls across various states, the battle tracker polls, etc., you start to see what is going on. Let's get a thing what old Bolton is up to here. Told U.S. allies that he believes that the International Range Nuclear Force Treaty puts Washington in excessive weak position against the Russian Federation there. They want to withdraw from. They're withdrawing from a lot of treaties here. Plans to inform the Russian Federation of its position in coming days. Allies want to withdraw from the landmark. This is a Reagan-era intermediate range of treaties. The plan is a brainchild of Trump's Bolton, and this is actually getting the U.S. in much, much more serious situations. For years, the U.S. expressed concern that Russian Federation violating the treaty, which is a lie, was seen as a high mark of the Cold War negotiation. This is under Ronald Reagan. The Trump administration has taken a more muscular approach and attempt to step up pressure on Moscow. It's not going to happen. It's the same as the trade war with China. We'll have numbers, man. That is our macroeconomics program. Incidentally, now you can go to bostonred.org and find a list of our shows from iHeart are there across the line, whether it be the political program of Boston Red, which is now warped into the Boston Red Network. But anyway, nonetheless, it is there. The open source report is there, and Numbers Man is also there, and you can look at those on any type of app you got. Your mobile app, you can get the mobile apps there. We'll get also YouTube, but that'll come up here shortly. We'll have the YouTube cast, and we'll switch over after the election to actually start doing the video edition. So we are working on some things here to enhance our coverage. From Tom Cotton, he does a lot of cotton picking in Arkansas, member of the Armed Services Committee, cheered the move. Well, he's been out there. I've long called for the U.S. to consider whether this treaty will serve national interest. Well, as they move out of these treaties, and what this is meant to do is very simply up the arms race to serve the military-industrial complex. More profits can be made. Admiral Harry Harris, he's a former head of the Pacific Command, warned early that this year that the U.S. has no ground-based missiles capable to threaten China because of the treaty, arguing that over 90% of China's missiles, meantime, would violate the past treaty. Unlike Russia, China is not obviously a party to the treaty. But your problem is with nuclear weapons, whether they be long range, intermediate range, no one except for some fool was going to use those because they upset the economic part in terms of a more global economy. This has not been argued. At one time we did at Jobs for Peace argue about the financial part. Incidentally, the megame has exploded to a record $1.6 billion. There was no winner on Friday. I guess that's why we're here. We didn't win. If we won, well, who knows what we'd be doing. Swimming across the English Channel, perhaps. Let's see this. This is actually something a little different. Consumer data compromised in Affordable Care Act enrollment portal. This has to do with the Department of Health and Human Services Center for Medicare and Medicaid. The problem there, the breach used by agents and brokers as a part of it, and some personal information there. Tens of thousands of people who have records have been compromised. Accounts are from a relatively small share of the 6.8 million Americans who signed up for coverage this year. But the batch comes as Trump's healthcare aides have been trying to foster a greater role for agents and brokers in the AC sign-up process instead of the healthcare.gov. And this is where it has went to. Let me just go very slowly with this. It's 75,000 computer records, consumer records, have been hacked from one of the data portals, used to get health care plans through the Affordable Care Act insurance program. Now, this is the one that has brokers there. This is an increased privatized thing. The statement from the Center for Medicare Services, this is Seymour Vermeer. Open enrollment will not be negatively impacted because the Federal Call Center and healthcare.gov will be uninterrupted for Americans who want to sign up. Have walked a fine line opposing the AC, the Affordable Care Act, and adopting changes that weaken the law while portraying themselves as overseers that would affect the enrollment process. A statement from the agency said agency staff first notified last Saturday in the online enrollment pathway available. This is agents and brokers. Now this is the increased private use in there and beginning an initial investigation. The breach was detected on Tuesday. It was detected. We'll have more of this on our next open source report where we'll talk about this. But again, this whole idea that the Republicans have, and this is something progressives have to lead the way. Obviously, the Democratic Party hasn't figured this out yet. This is on the 19th by Amy Goldstein. Anyway, in the Washington Post, the problem here is that the Trump administration wants to privatize health care back to the old days. So they can only inch in. They've got pre-existing conditions. They can't touch those. It's politically unfeasible. It's sort of like Social Security and Medicare. But they're trying nonetheless to do it. And those are the kinds of things that Republicans have to run on. There's no doubt about that. Nonetheless, this weekend we will have more and more debate coverage. And we invite you to peruse this debate coverage. You obviously not going to listen to all the debates, but many of these debates, particularly the ones that were audio only, only a limited number of people were able to access them. So we have this as a public service to everyone. Have a good weekend, everyone. On to Milwaukee and the Dodgers. That will finish it up. We had a World Series. We'll have special World Series coverage for next week's World Series. We always do. We probably on our sports program, we'll have something on the National League Series. I'm not sure how we're developing it, but that series has not been brought in. Part of the problem is this, from an editorial and from an all hands on deck. This election has turned out to be a much more dynamic election. I'm not talking about a blue wave, a purple wave, or even a red wave, because many of these contests are very, very close. So since they are very, very close, continual coverage. And also in some states, California for example, there is only one debate. In the huge state of Texas, between Beto O'Rourke and Line Ted Cruz, there were only 2 debates. I think there will be one final debate. We covered the San Antonio debate, and maybe the last debate was the final debate there. The SMU debate, that was the first one, and now we're coming with the second one in San Antonio. I believe there's a third debate also in Texas. North Dakota, was a debate there. We've not been able to find that as of yet, and we'll hopefully get it in. And what we're contrasting is positions. We did, in fact, cover Indiana between Senator Donnelly and his opponent there in the state of Indiana, Brahm was his name. And they're contrasting, and this is what we like to point out, the contrasting between the two candidates. And also when they talk about the Affordable Care Act, it's easy to bring this home when we actually have the debate material from the debaters and how they explore it. So Republicans have figured this out. So what they've tried to do, and this is an old trick, is try to use some of the firepower of the Democratic Party as their own. It doesn't work now, and the reason that you have difficulty doing this, you didn't have as much difficulty in the old days, because the comparisons type things, and this is what they usually talk about, were not as cemented. Now you have fact checkers, but the fact checkers, with all the fake news, have been sort of nullified. But at the same time, you have all the social media coverage out there, and you have all of these independent sources that are out there also. I'm talking about news gathering sources. You're not dependent on, say, a CNN or an NBC, ABC, and some of the old line situations. And you also have internet radio, which we're on, is now morphing, incidentally, to digital productions. So we'll see internet radio / digital productions. Where does this leave podcasting? Well, it's sort of whistling in the wind, is what it is. The digital productions /